Welcome to Destination Never Here, your guide through one of America's most pressing challenges, active shooter prevention. We'll explore beyond headlines and journey into the human impact, policy debates, and societal undercurrents of the active shooter phenomenon. We will engage with experts, activists, and those who are most affected to uncover insights and solutions. This journey is uncertain, but our destination is clear. Join us as we seek a path to address and reimagine solutions to this complex issue. Together, we can make Never Here a reality. But first, your host, Chris Grollnek.
Hey everybody, please help me welcome Dr. Gregory Vecchi, a retired FBI special agent. He's worked in BSU, hostage negotiator. He's an author, a family man, and probably most important, he's a friend. So please help me welcome him to the show. Doc, pleasure to have you.
Oh, it's great to be here. I'm so excited to be on your podcast, brother.
Yeah, well, we've had about 3 or 4 of these recorded, and we went back and erased them. So you're going to be probably A-1, right? We're backwards, but you'll be episode, I think, number 1, or we'll kick off with number 3. But yeah, you're really the first official guest, and I can't tell you how honored we are to have you. We have some really big announcements coming during the show, I think. This is going to be an online conversation with Dr. Vecchi, and I just want everybody out there. I've gotten a lot of questions in the past probably 2 weeks since I think I first announced it publicly that we're going out. And they're really strange to me questions about how to be a policeman, how to be an FBI guy. And then I've had some other really good questions that are more centered and grounded. I think you and I have had some open and transparent conversations about today's show, which is going to be, I think the key word and the theme of today is going to be vulnerable. And from your background, which I'm going to ask you about here in about 10 seconds, I think you'll find it's going to be enlightening. So please be relaxed. Let's show us everybody and show me and everybody else who the doctor is, how to get to where you are, and how you've accomplished so much. And then we'll dive into some problems of our country and beyond, as quoted in a couple good articles that you just did. And then we're going to jump right into this bad boy right here, a good book. So I think we're going to start right here. As we jump in, is there anything you want to clean up in the beginning of my intro? I mean, I know you were the chief of a section, but could you tell me what that means?
So unit chief basically means that you're in charge of what we just call a substantive unit in the FBI. So every specialty area in the FBI, whether it's behavioral science, behavioral analysis, or the crisis negotiators, or the crisis management people, the SWAT guys, the bomb techs, every single one of those are collateral duties typically that an agent will have. So an agent will be on the street investigating a crime, right? But then he or she may have collateral duties that they're interested in, like being a negotiator or SWAT person, right? Well, that training, that certification, things like that come from the substantive units. Okay. And so BSU was just one of many substantive units up there. And so it's basically, it's unusual because the FBI's got basically 3 tracks for agents. One is you can be an investigator. You can stay an investigator your whole career. You can go elsewhere and always step back and become an investigator. The other second is I guess you could say a management track. And that's when you're doing a lot of transferring and stuff. The supervisor, special agents, special agents in charge, et cetera, both headquarters and field positions. And then the last one was specialty areas, right? And so that's where I decided to go into was specialty areas. I started, once I left Miami, I put in for rapid deployment unit, and that was a specialty unit out of Quantico. That led me to Iraq and being embedded for a number of months with the military. What we did was bring the forensic background, the forensic expertise to help the military. We were looking at that point. We were looking at suicide bombings. We were interviewing people at Abu Ghraib. I was kind of in the background, assisting with a lot of logistics and stuff while George Pirro was doing the interview of Saddam Hussein. And so I think one of the few people I can say that, at least I saw the guy for real, right? And was close to him while all the interviews and things were going on. Very, very interesting. After that, went to the crisis negotiation unit as a full-time negotiator. And most of that is international kidnapping, and then doing kind of the administrative stuff, training stuff, the certification of our negotiators, and things like that. And then after a while, I was lucky to get into the behavioral science unit, and was there as as an analyst, as an agent, as a researcher, trainer, do consultations, case consultations, stuff like that. And then got into was lucky enough to be selected as the chief. And then what I tried to do was take us beyond your traditional violent crime, serial killer stuff. And we started looking at things like hostage takers, and we started to look at things like bank robbers, a little bit more in depth on that, cyber criminals, it's aspects of terrorism, gangs, and things like this, and basically just kind of move the needle forward a little bit beyond just a traditional violent crime serial killers, because we found out, and I think what's going to kind of factor into our discussion today, and certainly in my book, is the importance of understanding these offenders from their perspective, because these offenders are all different. Your bank robber is going to be different than your hostage taker, different than your active killer, your active shooter, and they act differently, and the expectations differently, and the way you deal with them is differently, and the way you influence or persuade them, and end up neutralizing them if you have to, or just getting them prosecuted or off the street, and all the things that go into that an agent or investigator or police officer would do. Really, you can benefit a lot by understanding the behavior, the meaning behind the behavior, and then adjusting your tactics, your techniques and procedures and things like that as such. And becomes very, very effective. And it's kind of a hard road to the hoe, so to speak, because a lot of people don't get that. But once they do, usually their understanding of the context of where they're working becomes a lot clearer, and they become more successful because they're doing it, from the perspective of the person they're investigating instead of doing it from their own, and eliminates a lot of things like confirmation bias and some of the other things that factor in that cause problems in investigations.
Well, so I have probably an hour plus of questions, and you've just opened up probably another 30. So I hope we can be gracious with some time. For those that have listened, I said we had a few of these in the can, in the spirit of full transparency. They're up and running, but I reformatted the show because I wanted to really understand the person behind the person and how you got to where you are. And I would never correct you in public. This being public, I don't think luck had anything to do with what you got to, brother. You said lucky to lead the BSU and the behavioral science unit. And I'll tell you, and as a former SWAT guy, we say luck beats skill every day, but I doubt that that's technically accurate for where you went. So I'm very proud to know you. I mean, I'm humbled by your presence here. And I think a lot of people that are listening to this, and from the questions that came in, you get the crazy questions, but sometimes those are the most independent and accurate fact-finding questions. This is all about you. On a 30-second overview, I never really wanted to be on the SWAT team. I never really wanted to be a policeman. I grew up wanting to work at the CIA as an interviewer. I wanted to be a polygrapher. That was my whole life dream. I'm not going to tell you how that ended up, but I think you know. But how this ended up with health and where we are. When I meet people like you, I'm fascinated because it transcends so many areas of what I've done, but what more importantly, the last 13 years of active shooters, right? Studying them, even interviewing a couple of them. I won't sensationalize who, being on scene during, following one of the vicious murders or massacres. And I'll tell you that, it really changes people. So, we got that cleaned up, and I think we're really good. And with where we are, we've memorialized how you, basically what you've done. Could you tell us, and without getting whiplash, because it's not going to be, it's formatted very well, it's going to come full circle. It may feel that way at first, but could you tell us how you got to retirement? Like, what day did you wake up at the greatest job that you've had in your feeling you worked very hard to get? You said, I think it's time. Did you meet an end time, or was it just time to go?
That's a great question. And I'll be just be perfectly honest with you.
Sure.
I was frustrated. I was frustrated with the bureaucracy. I was frustrated with a lot of the direction the Bureau was going at the time. At least in my world. And I just, I kind of got to the point where I didn't feel that I could, make a great impact anymore, or I'd wake up and, it was just more frustration than it was fun, essentially. Right. And, it's like anybody else. I learned this, along the way. People retire, because, you're in there and you get all excited about the job, and then it becomes mundane. The paperwork is overwhelming. You miss birthdays, you miss family stuff, you lose marriages. I lost my marriage, one of my marriages with the FBI, right? Because of the stress and because of, being gone all the time and everything like this, right? And it takes a toll. And so, for me, in the FBI, if you got, for the most part, you can retire at 50 and they kick you out at 57. And I just made a calculus. I said, look, I could stay in another 7 years, and be frustrated and not really be able to do my own path of where I want to go with this. I was kind of stuck, and it was kind of the way to get rid of the ball and chain so that I could then move into my next phase of life, which is to focus on just what I want to focus, which was on targeted violence and all aspects of targeted violence, and taking what I learned in the bureau, what I learned from the offenders, what I learned from the training, the experience, and all my mentors that I had, and get out and make a difference in a different way without the bureau. And so I made the decision, and I retired on my 50th birthday. And it was in the middle of the week. I didn't wait till the pay period end and all this other stuff. And it was a very quiet, simple lunch. And I've never looked back. But at the same time, I really don't think I changed much, because just the way the vectors intersected and the opportunities came up and how things just kind of worked out. I feel very blessed and very, very fortunate and actually grateful to the Bureau. But at the time, it's just like anything else. Sometimes relationships, sometimes, your time comes to an end, and you gotta move on to other opportunities. And you gotta be willing to take the chance. You gotta be willing to, instead of that cushy job that you have, now you're kind of on your own. You got to learn business. And it has been really difficult for me in the last 10 years. I've been out 10 years. Next week, I think it's next week, February 4th, week from this, is my 60th birthday. So I'm going to be 10 years out of the Bureau. And I'm as happy as I've ever been. But at the same time, it's scary. It's scary because business is new to me. And, it's just trying to find your way. And, it's never easy. And so it's just kind of like you never give up, right? You have that positive mindset, and you got to be willing to take chances, stay motivated, and stay aware. And, when I tell people, oftentimes, stay dangerous, I don't mean be necessarily dangerous, although I sometimes do believe that, right? You got to be. Sure. But when I say stay dangerous, I mean, don't take the safe pathway always. Look at, opportunities. Don't be afraid to fail. If you were afraid to fail, we would never have a light bulb, right? I always love the story about Thomas Edison, that he, thousands and thousands of tries, and then he finally got it, right? And I found out the same way. You just as soon as you stop trying, that's when you're not going to make the impact. And so, every failure is just another step closer to, success and making an impact. And if I can just make a little bit of an impact in this area, this is kind of where my passion is. I'm willing to do it, but I'm also willing to do it to be straight up front with people, to be a little bit of a disruptor, be able to, I like to question the status quo. And there's a lot of sacred cows out there that I question all the time. And so I just think it's good to have the discourse going and, to keep moving forward, because this is a joint effort. No one has the right answer, and you can't sit on your laurels and just keep doing the same thing over and over again. And I see a lot of that in this space.
Some of my favorite things, you hit on two of them. One is the Edison. He failed 10,000 times. He said, I didn't fail 10,000 times. I found 9,999 ways that it didn't work.
That's so true.
It's my favorite thing. But running out of the FBI, and not physically that you ran away from it, but what I say when people ask me, I was in the Marines over 8, almost 10 years, whatever, and plus reserve time and a long time. But I tell them I just ran out of Marine, right? Like I didn't quit being a Marine. I just ran out of being Marine. I miss it every day. I don't miss a day of it. I'll be 54 in a couple weeks. And I love life. And I love what you said about being dangerous, because so many people translate that. And it's actually one of the questions I have down the way about, from a psychological point of view, how come so many men get to that 50, 55, 60s? And I've seen it through a lot of different friends and interviews, and the machoism where they show up to you and they tell you, well, my background, and they sell you their resume. And really, I'm not here for that. But okay, I'll be impressed if you want me to, where everyone knows me. It's not self-deprecation. It's just not that impressed. Very strange life story of 14-year-old runaway, 8th grade dropout, and I've got like, I don't know, however many degrees, and they're not worth the paper they're written on. I don't have any new intelligence. I just have a degree to say, hey, you sustained school, or, you made it through. But let me ask you this. So when you were, let's say growing up, about adolescent, did you know you wanted to get in law enforcement or that type of thing, the FBI, or did you know you wanted to do behavioral science, or what track brought you to, say, the intersection of here we are?
Well, I was a confused kid because I thought the CIA was the FBI, or I had it backwards. I wanted to be in the CIA. I grew up on spy stuff, spy novels, Mission Impossible, the old one with Peter Graves, right?
Of course.
And all that type of stuff, The Man from U.N.C.L.E. and, all these really, esoteric shows. And I wanted to be in the CIA. And but what I saw in the CIA, what I thought was actually the FBI, as it found out, right? And so once I discovered that, it was kind of like, okay, well, what do I need to do to get in the FBI? I think I'll just apply. And well, that wasn't going to work because I didn't have a degree, right? And so I grew up in Des Moines, Iowa, middle class. Mom and dad didn't have any money to send me to college, things like that. So I had to get the degree, right? So I said, okay, I'll go ahead and get a degree. So again, not understanding the situation, I got a 2-year associate's degree in automotive technology because, again, I just hated class. I hated school. I was not going to be part of this, right? And then I got it. I applied for the bureau, and they summarily, shut me down because, you don't have the right degree, dummy. That's, essentially what they said between the lines. And I'm like, damn, I said, I got, okay, all right. So I guess I got to get a real degree if I really want to do this, right? And, in the meantime, I had gotten on with a local security company up in Des Moines area. It was Conley Security. And I tried out to Tom Conley, the guy, who got me really, settled into, okay, the right path towards, law enforcement and the FBI. And I love that job and everything. And so it just got me more motivated. So when I just decided, one day to go down to the MEP station, and I joined the Army because I didn't have any money, and I figured I'd use the GI Bill. And so my plan was go into the Army, get the GI Bill, and and I'm like, well, what do you want to do? Well, I didn't be an MP. I didn't pick MP, surprisingly, because I was thinking, well, I want to have a job I can make some money. So I decided to be electronic tech. So I went in as a Hawk system and fire control repair, and and it was basically, the school was at Redstone Arsenal for a year, and it was basically Army and Marine guys. So I got to be very friendly with Marines and things like this, and we used to razz each other. We had a great time there. And so I got to my out of AIT and then started work. And then this agency that I had never heard of called Army CID was promoting access or recruiting from people who were not MPs. So I looked up CID and I'm like, this is the FBI for the Army. I like this. This is cool. So I got in and became a CID agent and worked all manner of crimes, drugs, and general crimes, which is your slug and mug stuff, and a little bit of white collar and this or that. And then got my degree while I was working full time. And I picked the easiest one, human resource management from Park College at the time.
Right on.
Got that and they took all my correspondence courses, and I just, everything I could to get the dumb degree, right, just so I could get in the bureau, right? So then I get out and I'm ready to get in the FBI, and I'm like, okay, I'm set. I got CID experience. I got my bachelor's degree, military vet, good record, honorable discharge. Okay, and they turned me down.
And you were ready. You were ready for that.
And I was ready, and I was absolutely just heartbroken. I'm like, why did you turn me down? Well, because cyber at that time, this is 1992, right? Okay.
Wow.
Cyber was not really a thing, and the Bureau needed that because they saw that as a emerging threat. So they went ahead and, were looking for people with that background. Well, I didn't have that background, right? So I said, well, what am I going to do now? Out of the Army. The Bureau doesn't want me. So I started to think about, okay, so what are ways I can skirt things and get around, right? Okay. And then I figured out that through research that the FBI was nothing more than a bunch of 1811 criminal investigators, and that was the job family, right? And so was ATF, and so was DEA and stuff like that. So then all of a sudden now, boom, I've got 1,000 applications off to every 3-letter word you can think of, right? Okay, the 3-letter agency you can think of. And I got picked up by an odd agency called the U.S. Department of the U.S. Department of Agriculture, Office of Inspector General, where I worked undercover food stamp fraud. And so I did that for a year in Atlanta and South Carolina. And then I said, okay, now I got federal experience. I'm in 1811. Now I'm going to apply for the Bureau again. And I'm so excited. And I got turned down again because they wanted engineers. And I'm like, well, crap. So what can I do? Well, let's see. So I kind of puzzled it out and said, well, the FBI is in the Department of Justice. So maybe if I get into a justice agency. So I tried DEA, didn't work, tried Marshal Service, some other ones like this. Finally got into this other smaller agency very few people know about, called the Inspector General's Office, Department of Justice. And that put me in McAllen, Texas, working corruption cases against Border Patrol, immigration inspectors. At that point, long before Homeland Security was formed, it was the old Immigration Naturalization Service, which was part of DOJ, right? Did that for 4 years. Finally, I applied, and they were looking for my background, and I got in. And so, really, never looked back after that. You asked, how did I get into my current, interest and career fields? Well, one of the first things that happened when I got into the Bureau, because I had previous law enforcement experience, they assigned me to Miami Division, and I was put on a DEA task force, the first and I think only FBI agent that was actually on a DEA task force, right? And I had a group supervisor, a guy named Mark Boomar. I will always respect and thank him for all the opportunities he gave me. He was my mentor. And we started to, wiretaps was a big thing, working, Colombian drug cartels and, all the stuff that they did back in the day. When Miami, was crazy, more crazy than it is now in terms of drugs, at least in what we were. And so we went up on wiretaps, and I was a case agent. So I wrote the wiretap affidavits, went up on there. And this was my first really, kind of exposure to behavioral science and listening to people, because I really found out that, hey, these offenders, we're going after, drug traffickers, they kill people, they do all this other stuff, but they're people. They got families, they have, they have dreams, they have all the other stuff. The thing is, they've just, they're making their money by selling drugs, right? And killing people, right? That's really the only difference. But if it wasn't for that, I could probably like them, right? Especially the Italian guys, right? Because they're just really, they're fun to listen to, and all this other stuff, but they do bad things, so that's why we have to investigate them. And then from there, it was kind of like the aha moment for me when it came time to do the arrest. Right at this point, I had been transferred from DEA task force to a Russian organized crime task force. At that point, the Russian organized crime was coming down from Brighton Beach, and they were settling in Sunny Isles Beach, which is between Miami and Fort Lauderdale. And they were taking root. They were taking over the human trafficking, the MDMA, They were taking over other criminal rackets that were typically, operated by the Colombians and Haitians and these other groups and things. So we focused on that. It was a task force. Many of these guys at the time, all of them grew up in the Soviet Union. All of them had military experience, and a lot of them had KGB experience, right? So they were better than we were. They used to kick our ass on surveillance and things like this. They would come in and we would follow them, and they would take us down these roads, and then all of a sudden trap us and things like this. And they were really hard to work. And I learned a lot from them, listening to them on the wiretaps, right? And so it came time to arrest, and this was kind of my aha moment. So we had the SWAT team come in, the FBI SWAT team come in to do the arrest, because we're dealing with basically Russian really bad guys, right? I mean, guys that
Sure.
killers. They were let out of prison. They had prison time. That type of a guy. And we did the briefing. And so I'm the case agent. I'm still fairly new, a couple of years in. By this time I'm 3 years in. And so I did the briefing, and the briefing is, come in and you give them the background, what you're investigating, where they're at, where they sleep, where they work, what the cars are, the background, all the other stuff. So the SWAT team can kind of get together a plan and do the arrest at, dark 30 the next morning, right? And they stack up and go in, the whole thing, right? And one interesting thing was one of the SWAT guys, who got out of the van, because FBI, right? You got the van that is it doesn't say FBI, but everybody knows it's FBI. It's one of those things,
course.
Right? Okay, right.
Of course.
So the FBI guys are all getting out, right? I'm noticing this before my briefing, and they're all typical SWAT guys, right? They're all kitted out, and they're good shape, and and then this other guy came out here. He was kind of short, fat, and bald. And he was older than them. And it didn't quite meet. It didn't match. So something was not right. And it didn't take a behavioral scientist to figure this out, right? And so, he comes in and he's sitting in the back. And so I do the briefing, right? And so the SWAT guys, they get everything they need. They're going to go out to dinner and whatever they're going to do, and then come back the next day to set up for the arrest, right? The guy who was this older, kind of fatter, bald guy came up to me, and he just sits down. He looks at me. He goes, "Tell me about your guy." I said, well, I'm thinking, well, what do you mean? I just did. I just gave you everything. I have nothing else to say. He goes, no. You just tell me about your guy. I said, I don't think I knew what you mean. I'm sorry. He goes, you were up on wiretaps, right? I said, yeah. How long were you up on wiretaps? Gosh, a couple of years. Then you know your guy. Yeah. Well, tell me about his family. Tell me about what he likes. Tell me about what pisses him off. Tell me about, his relationships. What does he like? What's his hobbies? What are things that really upset him? What are things that, that you wouldn't want to bring up if you were going to talk to him just across the table? And I'm like, okay. So I gave him that stuff, and the guy took some notes. And the last thing he asked me, he says, what's his phone number? I gave him the phone number. And so he goes out. And so the next morning, everybody is all stacked up, ready to go. And I'm, of course, I'm thinking, okay, everybody's on pins and needles, right?
Don't be wrong.
Expecting the SWAT guys, right? Anytime, kicking the door, FBI, get down, you know how they do, right? Okay. And grab my guys and things like this. And then they were, I expected them to get back to me, and then they go off for donuts and coffee, and then I got to do all the paperwork, right? That's just how it worked, right? So nothing happens. And I'm like, wait a minute, something ain't right here again, right? And then all of a sudden, the guy who I had been looking at for the last couple of years, he's a killer, he's a mean guy, someone you would not want to ever deal with. He comes out, hands up, and turns himself in, no violence. He gets arrested, searched, no issues, turned over to me, and then went about my day. And, that was my moment where it's like, what happened? And what happened was that fat, bald guy, old guy, who I had misjudged, and who I didn't think was, I thought maybe he was, had a lawsuit against the Bureau or something like this, and he was just, you know, some trouble, right? Was the negotiator. And it was magic what he did. And I'm like, I want to be that guy. And I'm like, well, I don't want to look like that guy necessarily, but I want to be that guy, right? And so I just jumped in feet first as to be a negotiator, because that to me was magic. And it was magic to me because hostage negotiation, crisis negotiation is really one of the few, the only thing I can think of really, law enforcement activities where you are engaging with the subject while he's committing a crime as yourself, as a law enforcement officer, as Greg, right? And through conversation, about 90% of the time, he walks out because I asked him to. And that's pretty magical to me. And so I got pretty good at it. A lot of experience with that, right? But I couldn't figure out why it worked, because I would go to my training agent and he said, just keep practicing, do more role plays. I said, okay, but why does it not work, right? So that led me to my master's, my PhD, and the whole behavioral science thing that expand into that was the love of being able to use influence and persuasion, using your voice, using an analysis of behavior, right, to find out what's going on with someone, to make your life easier and to help other police and to help everybody else not get hurt, and being able to do this, based on just this addition of just understanding behavior, understanding the offenders and things like this, right? And so my PhD, people say, what did you get your PhD in? Did you get it in psychology? Did you get it in, sociology? No, I chose conflict resolution, because conflict resolution is what was the theory and the basis of it is what explains why negotiation works. And negotiation works because you have someone who's in crisis, someone who's decided that violence is the answer when I'm angry with my boss because I got fired, or my wife is cheating on me. And I take that person and I hold them against their will as a hostage, so to speak, right? Because they're in crisis. And I show up as, Special Agent Greg Vecchi, but when my opening line to this guy, regardless if he's a terrorist or a child molester or an active shooter or whatever, if I have that opportunity, is simply, hi, I'm Greg with the FBI. Are you okay? That's the opening line. Because what I found out through my research, and this is what I write about and research all the time, is that the influence and persuasion to get that person to stop being violent and do what you say is because you have to understand what a crisis is. A crisis is two things. It's, from their perspective, they can't cope with the situation anymore, and they feel that no one's there to help them. And when that happens and they get into crisis, the crisis has to be resolved. They can't take it. And so they resort to violence. And so as long as you either help them cope or help them be that social support, the crisis goes away. And I'm in no position to tell him how to cope. He doesn't know me. He's not going to listen to me, but he will listen to me if I'm just there to help. If I'm just there to talk him through and to get his perspective and to not judge him and to realize that, okay, separating the person from the problem, right? Yes, he's a criminal. Yes, he's going to go to jail. Yes, he's hurt people, killed people. He's a horrible person based on his deeds. But you got to keep the dignity when you're dealing with them, and you got to use these techniques, being empathetic, being non-judgmental, but in a very tactical way. I mean, it's a very specific skill set. I'm not by any means trying to get across that I like this guy or he's going to be my buddy.
Of course, yeah.
Tactic, right? Okay. But it works. And it's what we do genuinely with our friends, right? Somebody seems to be a little, sad, something's concerning behavior, right? We hear that all the time. And you sit down and you say, hey, seems like you got really screwed over on that, on that job interview. You didn't get the job. What happened, man? Let them talk, be that social support, and try to keep that violence from happening. So when I was researching my book, this is the application that I try to add to the threat assessment and prevention piece.
Let's just find that in this book right here, which I happen to have.
It's just
Fatal
it just happens to be in there. Yeah.
Go ahead.
And that's basically the application of this hostage negotiation theory, this conflict resolution theory, right? That works so well and explains hostage negotiation. It applies to active shooters, active killers, regardless of they use a knife, a gun, whatever you want to call them, right? It's a little bit more chronic. It's not as acute. It's a chronic crisis versus an acute crisis. The guy who loses his job and his wife walks out on him, that's acute, happens very, very quickly, lasts 24 hours. Boom, he's barricaded, police arrive. Okay, that's your typical negotiation, your typical crisis, right, that we deal with in law enforcement. But the person who's bullied, the kids who's bullied at school, same thing. He comes in, he gets bullied. Tells the bully, stop it, right? Leave me alone. Bully doesn't stop. Maybe he goes to his mom and his dad, or maybe his teacher, certainly tells his peers, Johnny, I can't take this, man. Johnny will not leave me alone. And he gets bullied and bullied and bullied and bullied. At some point, he is going to fall into crisis, meaning, number one, same thing. He's going to feel that he can't cope with the situation anymore. And unlike the hostage situation, what makes it more chronic and more long-term, over days and weeks and months and sometimes years, which we see right before they actually attack, is that by just by virtue of the characteristics of the environment, the context of this problem, they try to get help. And as long as there's a little bit of hope to get help, they're not going to be violent, right? Now they're going to start maybe thinking about it. There's going to be a point where they cross over from that what I would call the fatal grievance, which means you're in crisis, not just your everyday grievance,
sure,
but your fatal grievance where you are now at the point where you can't cope, bullying isn't stopping, now violence becomes the answer. And that's the step off to the violent ideation. And it's in those first two areas, that crisis, violent ideation on this pathway, right? That's your golden moment right there to intervene and use what any hostage negotiator would, which is basically identify that person who's in crisis and help them. Because if you stop the crisis, you stop the will to kill. You literally stop the violence. If you can't, or you just don't have the information, it just doesn't work, and they start moving into the research and planning and the preparation and the optimization and the dry runs and all the stuff that happens before the breach and the attack, the time frame compresses and it becomes much more urgent. And that crisis intervention approach that works so well in those first two areas may not work as well later on, because they're hell bent now on killing, right, or on taking out their target and things like this. And so this understanding, I think, is germane to this, because when I do it, and I do it from this perspective, I've had a lot of success. I've had success with my students and my people that I train in applying kind of this approach in the crisis, in the threat assessment and prevention area, like with schools, workplaces, churches, and other places that I've shared this with. And the other thing is that we have these false negatives and we have these false positives, right? And that's a big problem. How do you know when a person actually poses a threat versus just making a threat? And we see this problem in schools, right? Because kids don't have a lot of life experience, and therefore they don't have a lot of coping, or the same coping that we have as adults with that life experience. So everything that's bad that happens to them is new, right? And so they have a little bit less ability to cope. And so with kids, it's one of those things where because of that, they go into crisis quicker. But the thing is that in a school environment, we also notice that most of them will give some sort of leakage or some sort of idea that they're thinking about hurting someone, or they're thinking about getting a gun, or thinking about here. They're going to have a tendency to talk more about it, right? And we see that a lot. And at the very beginning of that, as an assessor, right, that leakage clearly shows or demonstrates that the kid's in crisis or that he's getting violent ideation. And as soon as that happens, that's the urgency to jump on that, right? And, not arrest the kid, not discipline the kid, but just take the kid down and say, look, you're really having a problem with Billy. What's going on? How can I help you? Be that social support. And, be that hostage negotiator, in this situation. Because again, it's simple, but it's difficult, right? At the same time, if you can stop the motivation to kill through taking care of the crisis, and you're there to help that person, then it stops. And the closer you stop it to the beginning of the pathway, the more effective you're going to be, right? And so, also talking about these false negatives and false positives, kids, because they don't have a good coping mechanism, because they don't have a life experience, they'll make a lot of threats, right? They'll say, "I'm going to kill that kid. Oh, he made me lose he hit me with the ball and dodgeball, right? I'm going to kill that kid, right?" He doesn't mean it. That's the difference between making and posing a threat, right? And so you got to understand that those are more transient. Those aren't going to be lasting threats, right? So when you're doing your assessment, you're going to ask, and if I can get an apology from that kid or an explanation, then almost always we know he's not on the pathway. It's a normative grievance. And so it's these nuances, right, that I think is kind of missed by a lot of people. So, I guess, people say, well, what do I bring to the table that's different on threat assessment, right? Well, one is understanding of the offender and their behavior, okay, why they do it and all the other stuff, okay, and an understanding of when someone's actually on that pathway. It's not just a grievance, it's the fatal grievance, and then being able to distinguish between what's making a threat versus posing a threat to avoid false positives and false negatives. So you don't have, oh no, he'll never be violent, and then next day, he's violent, right? Or you start thinking, oh, that guy's definitely going to be violent, yeah, because they don't understand baselines, anomalies, and actually how to do the analysis, right?
So when you talk to other people, I mean, those are all great points. When you talk to other people, I found in the phase I'm in right now with active shooters specifically, right? So, I was in an active shooter in real time and firing my weapon, but, got 168 rounds coming at me to remember pretty well.
Wow.
And then, but, luck and God were on our side that day. And when I went and started doing my master's thesis research for the capstone project, I found that it was just a bunch of opinions out there. And I'm fascinated, even this today, right? I'm working on a national standard. I do know that I'm not smart enough to get there on my own. It takes a lot of people. I think we have part of a national standard now because it's a holistic approach, which is more like a Secret Service model than anything, because it's, looks at the principle, goes outward, and we've made places more transparent. But what we're lacking is really an understanding of where your discipline comes in. And I have some opinion questions to ask you. The first, probably the most important, is: do you see when you against your travels when you go, the people that like those resume junkies? Oh, Dr. Vecchi, you're so awesome, but did you know that I have a door kicking degree? And you're like, okay, I'm really impressed. Sit down, right? Do you find that they're hard to get that message across because there's such polarization of, and this is not a political argument or agreement or disagreement. It's just, have you noticed this? When people come to you and they say, Dr. Vecchi, everybody should carry a gun, teachers should carry guns, problem solved. Chris Grollnek always says, I have 8 last mass murders in schools that people were armed and did nothing. So I'm not sure that's the right path. Like, how do you answer that question?
As far as like arming teachers and things like that?
Sure, when they just don't want to listen to the quote unquote psycho mumbo jumbo, people with guns are going to solve this problem and kids need spankings. I mean, when we really need to mold the conversation into kitchen table discussions, how would you address those?
Well, I would have to kind of start back and say, look, first off, when you're answering these questions and when you're educating people and trying to, give them the ground truth on really what we know, not based on my opinion, right, but based on best practices and empirical research, right? So I always go back to the research and that. And I know people don't care about research because, like you said, mumbo jumbo. But part of it,
I don't believe that, but they say that, right? When they talk to
of course,
sure.
A lot of people do. So it's just kind of like, it's one of those things where you go back and you say, okay, we got to change our mindset to a preventive mindset, even when we are a responder, even when we might have to respond, to that, right? And I'll point out, okay, so would you agree, that to prevent these things is better than having to respond to them, right? So instead of jumping to the response, let's first talk about the prevention, and then we can see, how we can fit the response in when necessary, right? And so a lot of times for me, it's about getting them to kind of rethink, wow, I could really prevent this, right? And so we talk about this, and one of the things is say, okay, look, let's look at these offenders, right? So we look at the various kids that have done these terrible acts, and adults and workplaces and things like this, and tell them, so they're bad people, but they always want to say, oh, they're evil psychopaths, and they're terrible people. And I said, well, they do terrible things, but every one of those people is a son. Every one of those are a daughter, or a father, or they're people that have
Human.
they're people that have problems, right? Okay, and you are in a tremendously powerful position to stop this stuff, right? As long as you know what to look for, and you immediately, report things that don't seem right, to what we call the concerning behaviors. And so what I tell them is to say, look, just think of this. So let's say, you got I always call the kid with the bullying, because everyone understands the kid with the bullying, because bullying happens in workplaces too, right?
Of course.
Every single person has got their groups that they deal with. So as a kid, they're going to deal with their parents. They're going to have a relationship with their parents, a relationship with their teachers, a relationship with their other peers, a relationship with their football team if they're on the team, a relationship with the SRO, relationship with the school counselor, relationship with you fill in the blank. And each one of these people know that person based on their relationship, and they're very different. For example, a kid is not going to treat his grandparents in the same manner that he does his peers. He's going to use different words. He's going to probably be more respectful, but there's going to be like a baseline or a normal behavior that we all know. So if I know you, Chris, and I've known you for, a couple of years, and we spend a lot of time together, I know your warts, right? I know your ups, your downs. I know what's normal for you. I know your triggers. I know the things you like. And when all of a sudden you're not being yourself, don't ignore that.
Yeah.
Ask, right? And so the way this works, and I always start this out, the conversation with this, with this prevention, because it's kind of empowering to the people once they understand how easy this is, right? Well, it's not easy, but conceptually it's very easy.
Sure.
Is that if you have someone who's in crisis, and let's say they're thinking about being an active shooter, and they're somewhere along the pathway, right? They've mentioned to their peers that they want to kill Billy. They can't take Billy. I'm just avoiding Billy because I can't take his bullying and all the other stuff, right? His peers see that, his teachers see that, his mom and dad hear about it, and all this other stuff. Let's say that he's talking about killing Billy. He's writing, things on pieces of paper, right, that indicate violence or things like this. Maybe that violent ideation or intent, right? And mom hears it, teacher hears it, peers hear it, SRO hears it, and then the crisis doesn't stop. And now they're on the internet looking up Columbine, right? Looking up previous attackers, getting the anarchist cookbook, looking up weapons,
Sure.
Looking at safe lists and hit lists and maps of the school and stuff like that, right? And everybody in their life sees a piece of that. SRO walks by and sees a map of the school in his open locker, right? He starts to bring gun magazines to school, which is different. He asks his dad to take him to the range. He's never done that before. He has someone to get him a gun or help him get a gun, try to recruit Confederates to help him, right? Things like this. And everybody just sees maybe one aspect of that. And by itself, all those things don't mean a damn thing, right? But when they're reported, and they're reported without judgment, and the only criteria that I have is like, okay, you as Chris Grollnek know this person in this space, right? Whatever, it might be your friend, it might be a subordinate, it might be whatever it is like this, and you see one kind of weird behavior that's really offline. And even if and you may or may not address that with them, but most people don't. That bystander effect kicks in. They don't get involved, right? They don't want to report it. They think they're going to be stupid, all this other stuff. But if everybody has a place to report that they feel safe about doing so, that they're not going to get in trouble, that this is about helping people, not ratting people out or being a snitch, right? And get them to feel safe in reporting any concerning behavior with no judgment. And every single person on any stage of that pathway, whether it's crisis, it's violent ideation, it's research and planning, or it's preparing, right? Everyone reports that to a threat assessor, right? Or a team that's trained in this. They take those behaviors because they're concerning. And I know they're concerning because if I've trained you right, Chris Grollnek, on this, I'm going to trust you that you know when the person you're around is acting out or acting weird. You know it because it's different behavior. So the bystanders, the observers, right, that are around people, they are in the best position to accurately identify and detect a behavior that's concerning and report it. The key is be able to report it with no judgment and no trying to figure out should I or shouldn't I, right? And get those dots right to the right people. And so if you basically can empower people to just say, look, when you see concerning behavior, and give them a little bit of background, not much, not a threat assessment, deep, training, but just an idea that, hey, look, you're around people that need your help. They're your coworkers, right? They're your students. They're your supervisors and things like this. These are the people that become active shooters. It's not the crazed lunatic from Mars that comes in or the serial killer from the outside. It's almost never that. It's someone that you know and someone who needs help. And so this empowers people in this process to feel good about helping their fellow person, the people that they love, oftentimes, the people that they like, the people that their colleagues, the people they care about. It empowers them. This process empowers them to report that. And then if you, again, I always talk about the dots and the right dots. That's what it's about. It's not just collecting dots, right? Those are the right dots to connect. Okay. And then you connect those dots, the assessor does, you find out where they are on this path. Well, you add a bunch of other stuff. I mean, I'm going to get into it. That's a little bit more complicated than this, but this simple pathway understanding, right? And then we can use a proper intervention. The person's in crisis. You don't call the police. You go and sit down and talk to the kid or talk to the employee. But if that person is buying guns, okay, now it's time to get the police involved. And you've got an appropriate intervention, and it's you can escalate it or do it based on what you see. And so what we're looking at here is basically it's kind of like a predictive analytics almost, right? It's like forecasting. It's looking at time behaviors in time series by people who know those concerning behaviors, are reporting them, and I'm plotting them along the way. That way, these patterns come out. So over a period of time, because again, there's no snap effect here. These things take weeks, months, and sometimes years before violence actually happens, right? And you can start building then a picture of this person in crisis. And it's visual, it's data points, and it's over a time series, and it allows you to be fairly accurate, in identifying the problem and then engaging that person. Rather, it's just talking to them, putting them, locking them up, putting them in a mental institution if that's necessary, whatever the appropriate situation is for that person. And to know that, each person is unique, each person is different, each case is different. We don't profile cases As soon as we start doing that, we're going to be wrong. We don't make judgments based on the weapon of choice. We don't make judgments because they may or may not have mental illness. Those are secondary analyses that you have to include, but it's not the first thing we look at. And that's all you got to tell people, right? And that empowers them. So I'm going to come across as changing the conversation a little bit to empowering you to stop this stuff. Okay. Now, if it doesn't work out right, you miss the assessment, or we miss things, right? Well, then you're on the right of bang piece, right? You're on the response piece, like this.
Wow, that's another whole
and
thing.
that's more your area, and expertise. But a lot of the stuff follows that. So I've got stuff for that too. But just as more, I guess, adding more, impact or more, just approaches and things like this, understanding the behavior, understanding people, the physiology, what happens to you when you hear a gunshot, that dictates really what you should be taught, what you shouldn't be taught. Right. And, all this other stuff. So, I'm not sure if I even answered your question, but going back,
it's right on.
But going back though to, arming people and things like this. Right. Okay.
How do you say no? I guess the 50,000 foot view in a minute would be, Doc, I'm not sure your mumbo jumbo psychology works. We have kindergarten to 8th grade teachers here, and they need to know how to fight and just knock out the person, or we're going to arm them. Why shouldn't we do that?
Well, first off, because in most jurisdictions, you simply can't have guns in schools and in the cabinets or in your thing. The other thing is that, in order to do that, if you wanted to do that, you would have to spend an amazing amount of time in training and certification and things like this, that go well beyond their ability to be proficient in the use of the gun, because they're teachers. They're not police officers, right? Or military guys, right? And so there's just better ways to do it. There's better tools based on what we know, the way these things carry out, right? Then we go back into explaining, okay, so what tools might work here? Well, we've done a lot of research at the company that I'm also part of, is Safe Defend. We do a lot of research on the importance of notification and protection. The whole goal, my whole focus, if you're talking about response, is I'm not the guy to come to train a police officer. I don't train police on this. There's people that are much better than me at it and things like this. I train the kindergarten teacher. Okay. I train the worker. I train the supervisor. I'm training the person who's just there to work or just to go to school. Right. And guns are not going to work in that situation almost always. Right. Because what we have to worry about here is the critical time gap between when the attack starts and when it ends. And the idea is to keep yourself safe and the people around you safe. And your job is not to go after the bad guy. In fact, we have a lot of instances that when that happens, people get killed. And I think it happened up in Maine. I think there was one guy that approached the shooter, and he was killed.
That's correct.
Another good example is the 2018 attack at the Washington Gazette. Had a woman who tried to attack, and she was killed. Okay. So the thing is that it's just the odds are against you trying to use a gun. You have much better odds understanding the concept of escaping the threat, understanding the concept of evasion or lockdown, and what you can do. Tons of things you can do before the attack happens, as far as pre-staging things, in the rooms and stuff like this. Like, where do you go? Where's a safer corner? Tape that off, right? Make sure you can turn the lights on. Make sure you got a damn lock for your door that you can lock on the inside,
And that's odd that you bring that up, though, because in one of the shootings in the schools, they had a procedure, and a child went to a different school. I can't say which one. Came back to the school. It was a recent school shooting, high profile, and they pulled the fire alarm because that's what they're supposed to do in the other school. And this school didn't have the fire alarm override system for whatever reason. It was doesn't matter. And in other words, it just collided. And I think what the basis of my story is, and we'll take a quick break here in about 2 minutes. If you're still good for another 30 minutes with us.
Oh, I'm good all day, man. I'm loving
excellent.
this conversation.
Good. I just want to make sure that I want the listeners. It's a perfect time now. If you're tuning out, stay tuned in, stay switched on. In SWAT, you say you're on surveillance so long your knees get weak. Well, this is a time to switch it back on, stretch, and listen, because we're going to get into this next part about the industry of active shooter prevention being $3.3 billion. Now, I read an article 2 days ago that you were quoted in, Doc, and it was amazing. They said it was 3.5 billion, I believe, more than the numbers are astronomical. Mm-hmm. But as we get into break really quick, I'd like you to just think about this. We spent in 1999 to 2012, and this is a critical time because FBI doesn't have the active shooter desk at the time. A person that I know, I can't say I know her well, but by reputation, I've met her twice. We talked on the phone several times. Catherine Schweit, she's wrote one of the pieces for your book. She's a fascinating lady, and I have a lot of respect for her in the category in which she fits for active shooters and prevention. And we spoke in 2013. I did a PSA video. We actually wrote the video. We're going to sell it. I mean, it's all about making money. And I woke up one night in a cold sweat, and I've recovered from some poor diseases that the body fights off. I'm not going to go into what they are, but they're the worst. And I was coming back to life, and I'm getting my life back together. And not that it was a part, but health wise. And I woke up and I said, I don't think I can charge for this. It was a spiritual message. I can't say it was God. It was one of those things. So I went to the production company. We decided we're going to give it away, and we did. And it was called Super Status, and it's still up. There's no promotion on it, but it has 40 million views. And she saw that, and I got to go to 2015. I met the director at International Associations of Chiefs of Police. And back then, I said all that because I wanted to set the tone. Right now, we spend 1.1 billion a year on response for police officers. Faster cars, shinier lights, better guns, better bullets, more ballistics, more training, whatever. And my famous and favorite saying is, we cannot respond our way out of this. And I think that we need to look at this holistically, because the more of you that we need, the more BSU style people, and might not just be BSU, but psychological profiling people that can not just profile, but discuss how to look at, and when I say profile, it's an ignorant word from my perspective, because I don't know what it means, but I get it. Like the profile. Okay, well, yeah, the profile is, and we'll talk about that. But what am I looking for, right? Just like the down and dirty. And we have to have all elements of that. And that's how I came up with prevention, response, and options. And that was not because I'm a smart person. I am farthest thing from it. What I am is data driven. So when you said people don't believe in data, I can tell you stories about people who argue with me just because they argue. And I don't argue back, and that makes people insane. I just say, I respect your opinion. Thank you. Because, once you get to a point of empirical data that shows you the numbers, you can't change the numbers. No. Police are on scene at 8+ minutes. It just is what it is. And we have to empower the people prior to that to know, hey, look, there's not a bunch of problems that you can't overcome, but we just have to train you. And one of those courses I did for DOJ was with Chuck Savitskas, former team leader at hostage rescue team at Quantico. He's a great friend. We look like twins. I am much more handsome, even though we look like twins, if not a couple years older. But listen, he was telling me about the selection process for what you said about being in a gunfight isn't what everybody believes. It's a fantasy. And so fantasy, I think we need to beat down a little bit and beat back and say, listen, we can address all of it. You're right. Okay. Whoever wants to say whatever your opinion is, there's probably 8 to 10 opinions. I believe they're all right. We just have to mold them into a piece that says it's not just guns, it's guns. It's not just mental health, it's mental health. It's not just pre-incident indicators, it's pre-incident, and explain what they are and kind of strategize with that. And when we come back, I'd like to just talk to you about a couple things. What advice would you give a younger you? What advice would you give a teenager that's about to make really good, qualified, stupid decisions because they're a teenager and still want to get in the pathway to fixing things? And then who would you talk to? Better, straight that. How would you talk to this field of $3.3 billion that says we need to come together because there's a lot of money there, and sure, you can make money, but if you do the right thing, you'll make more money because it'll be more fulfilling, and you won't end up in the Chris Grollnek phase of I ran out of Marine, or you ran out of FBI. So let's just take a 5-minute quick break, and everybody just stay put. I appreciate y'all. Ruben?
While I do appreciate a full 5-minute break, I won't take more than a few seconds to thank our sponsor, A-Train Tactical, an active threat consulting firm specializing in helping organizations prepare for, respond to, and recover from critical incidents. You can learn more at atraintactical.com. And at Midpoint Technology Group, you can learn more about how their multi-layer security defense system can help save lives in a potential active shooter situation. Visit midpointtechnologygroup.com. And most importantly, our community of experts, working together as a team, relying on the collective intelligence to help us achieve our mission of promoting safety and security within our communities. Together, we can make Never Hear a reality. And now, back to the show.
Hey everyone, thanks for staying with us. And shout out to Ruben Roel, the best producer that anyone has put on this earth so far, especially for Destination Never Hear. And his brother, Jonathan. They do beautiful work. I highly recommend their web development skills and sites, and reach out to them. Since that's not why we're here, and I'm going to do something that Dr. Vecchi probably won't do, but I'm going to do it for him. Listen, Ruben's going to drop a link right now in the podcast about this book. All right, Fatal Grievances. I highly recommend that if you're in the field of active shooters, and I'm specifically talking to all you police officers out there that call me every day. And I don't know how long you've been going at it, Doc, but I get these emails and phone calls daily. I mean, literally. Well, somebody, one of your fellow people from the academy, Glenn Norling, is the principal at ASPP. He called me straight out a liar. He said, Chris, that's not true. Nobody would do that. And I show him every day, screenshot it. Chris, I'm going to start active shooter business tomorrow morning. We're going to be rich. Can you tell me your PowerPoint? Send me your points, a student handout, and what book should I read tomorrow? I always laugh. I say, the book on go back to school and do something else because it's a horrible business. And it really is. And that's why I got into this podcast, because I really want everyone to know there is so much more to active shooter prevention than there is to response. And there's plenty of people out there that teach response. I like you, sir. I don't teach response anymore. I used to. I'm qualified, overqualified, but I am over 50 now, and my body doesn't work the same. And there's people out there that are 63 that are just awesome at it. And I defer to them. I'm not going to reinvent the tactics. But the point of this is there's so many people that reach out for advice. I'm dropping this link. There's about 4 books that I recommend. Since Dr. Vecchi's on, this is the one we're highlighting right now. There's another one of his fellow FBI retired people, Brig Barker, that wrote something on jihad that we recommend. But this talks about not just the pathway, but what I found fascinating about it is it transcends school and campus, and it transcends the workplace. It really goes into life, and it goes into how I wrap up my seminars. People raise their hand and say, well, Chris, what can you do if you're whatever? And I say, get involved. That's the number one thing you can do. Just be involved, be present, talk to your family about it. These are terrible conversations. And I do not promote the violent side of the conversation, but I say have the realistic side. And I think you touched on that, Doc, where it's like, you have to be able to say, I'm nervous, I'm scared. However, if this tragedy happens, do you know what you're going to feel like? You have the opportunity not to have that conversation by simply having this one. So where we left off, I want to just remind everybody again, it's called Fatal Grievances. It's got 3 people. Dr. Vecchi wrote it with Marianne Markey and Jeffrey Daniels. And I'll tell you, there's some fascinating pieces in here beyond that it transcends, and it's easy to read. But specifically for people in the active shooter business, I get asked this often about active killers are only a problem in the US. And instead of going down that whole rabbit hole, which we could, and I'm willing to, but I'm going to give you the option, Doc. We can talk about how this transcends the United States, and it is a problem because the FBI used to say active shooters were included knife attacks and truck attacks, and they became active killers. So they redefined that for clarification after, I think, Nice, France. But looking back, now that we transcend and we're all over the globe with murders, how do we have an American business model of $3.3 billion with foreign companies coming in to bring solutions to problems they might not understand? And then in the same breath, turn around and say it's only because it's an American problem. So if that question's a little bit too broad, we could narrow it and just say, if you were to look at that 3 buckets of 1 billion each and leave the $500 million out, because at this time it doesn't matter, right? So much money, I can't fathom it. Where would you spend that billion? Do you equally divide it, or do you really look at the country and say, if you want to solve the problem, Dr. Vecchi says, sir?
Well, as far as, we're talking about response now, right? We're talking about
the whole thing, the before, middle, and after. Sure.
Okay. So keeping that prevention mindset, one of the things you have to understand, or at least what I would say, is that there's not you can't throw money at this, right? And there's so many gadgets and things out there. It's almost like a solution looking for a problem in a lot of ways, right? And and so for me, what's frustrating, and I'll just kind of go off what you just mentioned about how much money is spent out there. I speak at a lot of like school safety conferences and things like this, and of course I show up there and in the vendor section, the safe defense system, we're trying to sell that and things like this. And of course I'll walk around the vendors, right? And there's maybe 3 or 4 out of hundreds, right, that really are focused on some sort of prevention or threat assessment. Everything else is metal detectors and scanners and gadgets. I mean, just all this stuff. We got software, and so one of the things that strikes me, at least in the school arena, and it's kind of the same in the workplace, is again understanding the offender and understanding what's the probability of attack and what's the probability of type of violence you're going to experience. That's where you got to put your money, because there's not enough money to go around, but you want to put it to where it's going to have the biggest impact, right? So for example, we know that about 91, 92%, this is coming from FBI Secret Service stats. These are real stats. About 91, 92% of the attacks that happen, in schools come from the offenders are former or current students, right?
Yes.
And
yes,
I don't think anyone's going to argue that. Okay. But if you go to any show where there's vendors on, you're going to find that 91 to 92% of those vendors are planning for 9% of the problem, which is outside of the school. And so, when you look at the different types of violence, you break it down, is there going to be a type 1 violence? Now, type 1 violence is stranger violence, or people that's not associated with the organization, or not customers, they're not employees, they've got no relationship. Bank robber is the best example I can think of, right? That's going to be a type of predator that's coming in for a resource predator type stuff, right? Okay, so that's one aspect that you got to think about, right? So that's going to be your perimeter fencing. It's going to be your metal detectors and your bulletproof stuff and everything like this, and your visitor control and all that other stuff, right? And then you have the other type of violence, which is customer type violence, right? Not going to be applicable too much in a school, but in certain workplaces like Amazon, or places that are retail, mall, open spaces, or malls, or things like this, customers become violent for grievance reasons, and right. And then you have a type 4 type violence, which is what we typically are focused on here. I call it member on member. It's a former or current employee or former current student, right? And then the spillover violence, which is a type 4, which is like the angry spouse who brings domestic violence into the workplace, right? And brings the violence from the outside in, right? And so, one of the first things I do when I'm talking to a superintendent, or I'm talking to a human resource or CEO or security guy, is saying, okay, well, where are your problems, right? And so you have to kind of redefine what's the real threat, and if you understand what the real threat is, you got to understand, well, then what's the motivation behind that threat that, that's going to drive the behavior? Well, we know that this is premeditated violence. This isn't reactive violence. This is planned violence, right? And if you break down, you got to look at that. Well, why do people commit violence? Well, there are a lot of reasons, right? But the top three that are easy to explain to people, right, as far as contrasting, is number one, you have a predator who's doing it for a benefit for himself, right? So that's going to be your resource predator, right? Guy that's going to come in, rob the bank, or break into your house at night, do the home invasion, whatever, to grab your valuables, your guns, your jewelry, stuff like this, right? That's not the guy we're talking about. Almost never in these, right? Okay, occasionally, but again, if you're looking at schools, that's going to be about 9% of the problem. Okay. The other one is your process killer. And this is the one that we never see hardly. This is the serial killer, the guy who's just doing violence because he gets off on it. He likes power and control over people. Okay. We prepare for that. That's almost non-existent in this space, right? And then we have the grievance predator. And this is going right to what we're looking for. So regardless if it's a person on the outside, inside, whatever, it's a person who's got a grievance. And what is a grievance? It's someone who feels that they have been wronged. They feel that they're being persecuted. They've experienced a significant loss, or it's some sort of ideology, right? Like a religious ideology, political ideology, right wing, left wing, whatever you want to call it, right? Okay, domestic terrorism, okay? And no matter how you shake that, they're all grievances, okay? And so knowing that and using that analysis and probabilities and your vulnerabilities, where are you most likely going to be attacked? Who are most likely going to be the target? What's your best day to do it? What's the best building, the best room to do it at? Things like this. So you look at the offender motivation and offender behavior, and you marry that with your physical security, right? And you're looking at probabilities. Again, there's no 100% here, right? But if you put your money, if you put that $3 billion in your probability based on an assessment of your situation, okay, you're going to have a much better ability to defend against that, right? Or respond to that. And then I want to kind of move to the thing that I can't remember where it was. It was some video you put on when you were talking about just this week. You were talking about that notification delay.
Oh, sure. I think it was a Discovery Channel that I did documentary. Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, this is just an example. When I'm thinking of Chris Grollnek, I'm thinking this is a brother from another mother, because I saw that I saw that, and it's like, God, this is like he's singing my song. Because one of the other things in terms of preparation for the response, okay, aside from the law enforcement side, the EMS side, talking about the person who's going to experience that, the person who's going to be in the school, in the classroom, the teacher, the student, the worker, whatever, okay? Everything has to be focused. If you're going to spend money, okay, not only on the security, physical security, things like this, vulnerability assessments of things as to what's the probability of the type of violence you're going to experience, and what's the probability of the type of offender. Okay, we got that out of the way. We've already talked about that. But for the people, it's that critical time gap between when the attack starts and when it ends. And everyone thinks about the police response, and that's only a third of the whole problem. It doesn't matter that the police can respond in 1 minute. In that News Gazette thing, it was a 1 minute response time. 5 people still were killed. The reason that about 80% of the situations, the police do not stop the person in time,
even if they're unseen. Got to
even
throw
if
that
they're
caveat
unseen,
up there.
right?
That's right.
Is because of a number of things. One is the actual response time, because it does take time. Most of these incidents are over in 5 minutes or less. Most of the damage is done in the first 2 minutes. Okay, especially if they have a firearm, right? Which most do. Okay, you hit on the part that most people don't think about, right? That I'm also in agreement with, and is that notification time. The police cannot respond unless they're notified, unless they know where they're going and what the situation is. So then we talk about 911 notification. Okay, that sounds great in theory, but here's where it goes to, and you kind of touched on this earlier because you've been involved in these. You've seen the crime scenes. You've seen the horrible, just the death and destruction, the the impact, how horrible this is when you start hearing gunshots and people are pointing, rifle barrels at you, and you're seeing people bleeding and screaming, right? Okay. This is where the human physiology piece comes in. So besides the knowing the offender behavior, my next thing that I test everything on, is it going to work with human physiology? When the person's in a body alarm response, anytime that we feel threatened physically, emotionally, or psychologically, our caveman brain kicks in, and we go in that fight or flight thing that everyone talks about. I call it the body alarm response. If you cannot, if you're not trained to where you can deal and function when your body's in that response, then you're probably doing the wrong thing. You're probably buying the wrong gear. You're probably buying the wrong, thing. So this goes to the three parts of before when it starts and when it ends. You got your lack of notification time. I think you said 5 minutes. There's a lot of research out there that's up to 10 minutes between
Sure.
the time the 911 operator actually gets enough information, the first notify the police department, the right jurisdiction, right? And then give them enough to say, okay, it's at the high school or it's at the school or where it is. So you've got that notification piece. So let's say it's 5 minutes, 10 minutes, right? That's kind of the range. Then you have a police response. Let's say it's 3 minutes. Now we're at 13 minutes. The police arrive. They still got to find the bad guy. How long does that take? Big question mark. That could be another minute. It could be 5 minutes. If you're talking about large districts, school districts, where you have like 15 buildings, that could double that, right? And now, so that's where the problem is. And so where my space is how do you protect yourself during that space? Because and so one of the things, when you're talking about technology and things like this, one of the things that drew me to Safe Defend, right? Okay. And there are other companies out there that are doing similar things, but nothing like what we're doing there, because it's based on understanding the offender, understanding the physiology and the time gap. So essentially what you have is a cabinet, a safety cabinet that's in the classroom, for example, right? And so you barricade yourself in there, okay? You hear gunshots, you barricade, lock the door, things like this. If that offender, breaks the threshold, that's when you fight. You don't go chase the guy, but might have to protect yourself. So if we back up and we look at notification and protection in that time gap between where it begins and when it ends, if you have a notification to where if you put your finger on a reader and it immediately goes to 911 and it gives 911 who set it off, where the cabinet is in the building, the room number, the floor number, and then the address and the name of the building, all goes out within 2 seconds. And also the nearest door to where the alarm was, or the emergency was perceived. That
Right, the activation.
It gives a starting place for the police when they arrive. Also giving a immediate email and text notification to every single employee, so they have ground truth as to what's going on. They know where the problem is, so they can make an informed decision. Do they want to escape? Do they want to evade? Do they, or are they going to need to
whichever 3 words you want them to do? Yeah, let me just say this really quick. On the 3.3 billion, 3.5 billion at this price, who cares, right? But I couldn't agree with you more that it has to be broken up. You have to look at this objectively through 3 different barrels, right? Pardon the pun. I'd like to clean up the one thing that I said in that Discovery Channel, because the numbers are right. You're more accurate when it comes to the majority, but I'm going by something that we started at the beginning of the conversation. That's why I said it's going to be a little bit more vulnerable, which is, our attitude. Why'd you leave the Bureau? A little bit of frustration. I'll tell you, some frustration is being a civilian and be looked on from the outside, whether I'm retired police, which I am, former Marine, no problem. I'm still nobody, and but I appreciate that about myself. And when people call me and tell me, Chris, you don't read very well, obviously. The Secret Service report says 1 minute to call police. And I said, that's absolutely right. But did you know that they forgot to put in the report that it takes 4 minutes to realize you're in an active shooter? And just because the police got notified, that's when 911 picks up the phone. So now we get into the Dr. Vecchi analogy of, now you have to figure out, what do? We orientate with a map and compass. They have to orientate how to get there. So if the audience could take one moment and just close your eyes and think about this, you're hearing shots It's the worst day of your life. And you close your eyes and you say, that sounds like a backfire. Well, you're on the 27th floor of the Pontiac building. There's no Pontiac Firebird up there, number one. Number two, help me. I'm in the tall building with the lights on because you're a visitor in that building. You know, I think I just laid the groundwork against, I have a lot of people that we endorse and different products, and I have no affiliation with Safe Defense. I have none, but this is the part of that 3.5 billion-dollar thing. We have to get comfortable in helping each other's products get out there because some solutions are better than others. And I would ask you and give you the floor, actually, please tell us about it. Please tell us how it works. And if I just left you with nothing else but help me, I'm in the tall building with the lights on, and you look at a map of LA, but the 911 doesn't have an orientation map, but they have your safe defense system. What happens next?
Okay, piece of cake. And this is the beauty of it, and the reason why I went to this company over a number of other companies when I was looking for, to do some training. So you've already perfectly laid out the situation, right? Okay, you're scared, you are in disbelief, and so what do, right? Well, it goes down to what can we do that doesn't require you to pull out your cell phone, try to do this, gross motors, right? There's
right.
Anyone can be taught to do this, and we put that on a fingerprint reader. What happens is Safe Defend has got activation modules that are in hallways, and they also have activation safety cabinets. Okay, the safety cabinets are located in the classrooms or in the offices or things like this. Every single person that is an employee is programmed in there through biometrics. So no one can just accidentally set it off. The active shooter can't go like with the fire alarm and pull the fire alarm so everybody comes out, right? So they can shoot them. Only people who are programmed in can set it off. Okay. When you set it off, immediate notification goes to 911 with that information I just said. The person who set it off, the location of where the emergency is or where the emergency was first identified, room number, floor number, building number, name of the building, and nearest exit to, or nearest outside exit to that thing. And also everyone who's programmed in there and anyone else that you want to program in there is going to get a text and a email with that same information. Okay. There's also going to be an audible alarm that only goes for 2 minutes and then stops because you want to be able to hear the gunshots. You don't want the constant, alarm. And it's a unique alarm that's very different from the fire alarm. Okay. That's the notification piece. So it takes the burden off of the scared person, the person who's literally fear for their life. They don't have to fumble for 911. They don't have to try to figure out all they got to do is this, and that is taken off their shoulders. That burden is gone. The second thing that happens is the cabinet opens up and you get a go bag that you can grab. In that go bag has got safety tools and medical tools. And we provide a baton, gel pepper spray, and a high-vis strobe flashlight. Okay. And we are teaching them, this is the engage or the fight piece, is that if the person crosses your threshold and gets into the room that you're in, that's when you are going to fight. You're not going to go out to chase the guy. And it gives you confidence. It gives you a plan. And then we also, obviously part of the training is where the best place to go and all the check marks for,
Sure.
All that stuff we talked about before, right?
Into the response mode, right.
Right. And then also in there's a tourniquet, there is pressure bandages and C-locks, which is like a quick clock type thing, right? That you pack the wound with. And C-locks, we chose that because it doesn't react to blood thinners. So it's not going to thin the blood like a lot of these other ones would if you have an older person that's on blood thinners, right? They'll still clot, right? So we teach them once you're safe, okay, then you've got the ability to take care of yourself and others medically and it's just a matter of surviving until it's over with and and the police finally do arrive and things like this. And what I like about it is that it's instant notification and it provides you with the tools. And these tools are recommended by insurance companies and things like this. Schools have gotten their insurance reduced because of these safety tools and the way that we give them the narrative to give to the insurance companies so that they can even save money on that. But what it does is it gives everybody a plan. You get a plan A, a plan B, and plan C, and then you've got tools both for protection and for medical. And you give these people the training.
Empowerment. You've empowered them.
Empower them. And
Sure.
they are so thankful because no one knows what to do. And we give them those tools and the training. The other thing we do is we avoid when we do the drills and the exercises, we avoid all of the kinetic training, right? With the guns,
right,
and firecrackers and the fake blood. All that does is traumatize kindergarten teachers, and it traumatizes the kids because these are our clients. We're not doing this for law enforcement. Okay.
Let me tell you something really quick, right where you're at, not to interrupt your flow, but when people ask me, why do you not come in and simulate an active shooter? I simply tell them, do you light firefighters on fire to let them know it's hot? The answer is no, right? You just tell them,
I was just going to say that, man. I was going to say, that's what I tell them. I also tell them, I say, what do you do? How many people have been in a fire drill, right? Everybody, right? It's been like since the 1950s, right? All the time, every time, right? Any type of building's got to have it, right? I say, how many times has someone thrown a smoke bomb or lit a fire in the hall? None. Okay. So we don't need to do this. And it's visualization. It's also, there's a way to talk to your kids. And so we have a script and training on how to talk to kids under 5 and kids over 5 and what to say to them, right? That prepare them that they're just going to follow the leader. When you're under stress, when you're scared, you're looking for leadership, you're looking for someone to follow. And then we empower those teachers and supervisors and workers, and whatever the situation is, to be able to have confidence and know what to do. And
what's the website? What's the website to reach out to you guys and take a look at
safedefend.com, safedefend.com. Here's the other thing that sets us apart also from other things. We follow the same, I call it the fire alarm for an active killer or active shooter situation, only better. It's hardwired, so there's no clickers. Okay, there's no Wi-Fi, no Bluetooth. Everything is hardwired, just like a fire alarm. Okay, no one can set it off unless you're programmed in it. It is a single-use focused. You don't use it for anything else. You don't use it for other alarms. You don't use it for anything but that. So it's a dedicated, just like a fire alarm. And so you don't have to have clickers and try to, how many times do I have to click? It's just this, the burden's off and everything happens and I can focus on being safe. And so it's hardwired, it's dedicated, and it's instantaneous. And we have, backup batteries in case they cut the power. We have all kinds of redundancy fit into that. And it's customizable because, now I'll tell you, we talked about guns, right? We do have one client who puts guns in the safety cabinet. They live in Wyoming, okay? And law enforcement is 2.5 hours away. So
different dynamic.
That's a different dynamic, but that by far, that is the exception. We have found that just understanding what engaging the offender means is that protecting that threshold, right? Okay. Understanding cover and concealment, basic things like this, right? And using these tools, because here's the other thing that people don't think about. The offender thinks he's going to win. The offender's got that gun. He is not expecting you to fight back. He's not expecting you to use tactics, and he's certainly not expecting an ambush. And when we go back to the old OODA loop and the old action beats reaction thing, what we're teaching them is for the kindergarten teachers to set up an ambush. And so as soon as the appendage goes through the doorway, it's destroyed, right? The pepper spray, the baton, looking at things like you don't normally look at, like a window is now an exit, right? The door the door that it says alarm do not hit, or the alarm's going to go off, you go out that door, right? If you don't have these tools, improvised, you look at coffee cups differently, fire extinguishers, other tools a little bit differently. And pre-stage, have that heavy bookcase ready to go that you can put in front of the door. Have that door lock already installed, and have it taped off so you know where to go to be safe. And everyone then has a role and is ready to go in the event that the unthinkable happens and he enters the room. You've got the advantage. You've got the initiative, and it's about understanding all that. It's a game changer.
So, and it's so, what I found is it's so simplistic and it works. And the easier it is, the better it works. And, we are very heavily leveraged. And I don't mean financially, but I mean from every point of reference that I could find for technology being the answer. You have a technology project or product. And obviously, I don't own any technology companies. I don't own anything that's part of the wheel, but I am all about the solution. I really want to bring this back. I appreciate the opportunity that you could get to talk about Safe Defend. That's why it's not that I'm promoting the products. I'm trying to tell people, if you're going to be in this industry, because that's who's going to be listening to this, right? A lot of people that want to be teaching. How did Chris get to where he is on that mountaintop? And there's a lot of people that come to knock me off. And I frankly it's easy. You become invisible. There's nothing to knock off. I'm not on a mountain. I never believed I was. And I think by having that courage, that you have to put yourself out there. You have to be vulnerable. You have to tell life stories. You have to understand what made Dr. Vecchi get to where he is today, where he's going to be 60 and working for Safe Defend. Have you done everything you wanted to do? How cool is it that you were in the FBI? How great was it to get to, BSU and be a hostage negotiator? And, I'm going to tell you a funny thing about stress. I was on a search warrant for the DEA, come full circle to task force, right? I was on an FBI task force doing a DEA warrant. How does that work? I don't even know. And then I was on a Marshall's task force doing an FBI warrant. So crazy. Anyways, we had a Zeta house, right? A cartel house locally. It's like number 17. And we weren't expecting resistance, but that DEA came in that morning at 4 a.m. and like, hey, by the way, we got no intel, no eyes on. We lost them last night. Talk about counter surveillance. They read, maybe the listeners won't know, but the box, when you follow somebody, you do a box and control, box one. And we became the box, or they became the box. Is horrible. So they have great counterintelligence. And we hit this house, and the team leader has been in a fight. He was a former Army Ranger. I'm not going to tell you his name because I don't want to embarrass him. He's a good friend of mine. He's screaming, and I'm a point man. So I hit breacher up, and he's like, we're explosive breaching the door. He's like, in 3, leader, this is 3, I have control. 3, 2, and you don't hear 1. The door's gone at 1. And I stand up and go, and the door's still there. I'm like, oh my gosh. I was a little early. There's my stressor. We in the house. It's 9,000 square foot home, and the guy's yelling, bang up, give me a flashbang. And I'm literally touching his shoulder, going, I'm right here, bro. I'm right here, bro. But that was his what we call vapor lock, right? Where he just nothing happened.
Yeah.
And then afterwards, we're in the team briefing, and so he's like, Chris, you think you're so cool? I'm like, oh man, no, not really. And I'm about to get embarrassed, and I know it. And they go, remember that car chase last week? I'm like, you had to bring that up, right? I'm in a car chase. They're like, be on the lookout for a Lincoln 82 with tag number Whiskey Mary 2, whatever. I'm like, I'm behind an 82 Lincoln Whiskey Mary. I got the car. I'm in pursuit. And I mean, I've been in 10,000 pursuits. Show me code. I'm northbound on 75. We're at 110 miles an hour drinking Starbucks. But this day I wasn't ready. You're not prepared. And if you don't know how you're going to act, right, just spill coffee on yourself and you'll see what distress looks like. So I really appreciate all that. I really like that we were able to bring in Safe Defend. I really am grateful for the opportunity to share your book with people. I ask that when you promote any of this, or even just put out there about you being a guest here or whatever, please say that we want open, transparent operations and thought processes, not because I want you to say it, but if you feel that way, then great. If not, tell me how to do better. As we wrap up, I'm going to ask you a real personal question, maybe 2 of them. And if you don't want to answer, just say pass, and I'll fill it in with something really ridiculous of my own, because I got plenty of dumb stories. But if you were growing up and you were, say, 15 and you're going to join the Army at what, and you, like you did, you answered some of these where you're like, well, I couldn't get here, so I did this. I mean, we have a very similar track. I dropped out of school in eighth grade and became a mechanic. So when I went to school to get what do you call it, a continuing education degree, they're like 2 years. I'm like, I don't have 2 years. I didn't go to the Marine Corps like yesterday. So I went to an automotive repair school and got straight A's. It was great. Voc Tech, right? Got my 15th semester.
Exactly right. I'm with you.
Yeah. Well, I can't read or write, but whatever. So, anyways, there I am. And I remember I had made so many stupid mistakes. I never thought I was going to be in the Marine Corps. And I don't mean devastating mistakes like, murder, rape, assault, anything like that, or even drugs. I was into race cars and I was into guns. And I love going shooting in places you probably shouldn't be shooting, but that back in the day you could. This is in San Fernando Valley. But street racing, I mean, I was an idiot kid, 15, 16, 17. Do you have anything like that you remember, like, wow, that could have changed the trajectory of my life? Because I ask you that to think about the next question, which is, what do you tell somebody that wants to be like you?
Oh, well, there's probably a number of things. I used to like this. I used to like to street race too, and so we would always, be fixing up our cars and go in there and just tear down everything and run from the police. And I mean, it was just one of those things where if we would have, if things could have changed, if I got caught, a few things that I tried to do, and the other thing, for me is that I would have gotten a lot better, a lot faster if I would just have learned. And this kind of goes back to I think your next question. What would I tell my younger self? Or what would I tell everybody? Right? Learn to listen to people and learn without judgment their perception, rather you like it or agree with it or not, and use that to your advantage, because everybody's favorite word is their name and everybody's favorite subject is them. And if you make it about them, they're going to leak, right? They're going to tell you everything that you need to know to be able to maneuver, hopefully, a collaborative engagement, or at least something that's going to work for you, versus you telling them what you think and what you need. One of the things that I also learned on that is, like, on going to talking about going to getting jobs, right? Job interviews, right? Learn to interview your interviewer. If you go in and you're talking about what all about you, you're forgetting about the fact that, well, they're not hiring you because of all the great things you did. They want to know how you're going to help them. And just shutting your mouth and listening and getting their perception is going to give you everything you need so you can hit all that and start asking about them. And before you know it, you're interviewing them. They really know not too much about you, but they feel good enough about you that they want to hire you now because they can't live without you. So I wish I would have learned that a long time ago when I was younger. And I say that to students. I say that to my own kids, although they don't listen, right? And I say it to people, and I say it to people who want to listen. Unfortunately, the people that go, "Oh yeah, you're so right on that," they're along in age, right? It's not the young ones that typically do that. But the bottom line is, learn to be a disruptor. Learn to be a disruptor. Learn to question things. Don't be afraid to question things. If something doesn't feel or sound right, be open to the fact that you don't know everything and your perception might be wrong, and just listening and gauging other people's perception and showing them dignity, empathy, and non-judgment stuff goes a long way in anything that you're going to do. And that's what I would leave anybody with in terms of my lessons learned. And I tell you, I didn't learn that till very late in life, really, to tell you the truth. It wasn't until about the time I got to be in hostage negotiation well into my late 30s or mid to late 30s, right? And losing relationships, losing family, losing marriages, and things like this, because it was all about what I'm doing and my job and what I can do and what you need me. And it was just that if I could take back anything in my life, it would be that, and saying, look, my past self, get that right first, because the rest of the stuff will still be there. The rest of the stuff will still happen, and it'll probably even more successful than as it turned out that I was fortunate enough to be.
I love that. You hit that half century mark and it's some type of enlightenment hits you. I remember 51 where I was on my birthday looking back saying, hey, dumbass. And that's me. You know, what was wrong with you? I mean, I have the whole award wall behind me. I'm pretty humble and people know this about me. I don't, you say you're humble, but it means you're not. But I don't watch, I've never seen myself on TV. I've never heard myself on the radio. I don't watch these podcasts. I don't really care. And I have plenty of critics out there that tell me what I did wrong. So why would I waste my time? But I have learned a lot to just, be vulnerable, be humble, and be really open, honest, and transparent with yourself when you get the feedback. And Greg, listen, man, I know you have a coin that I sent you, but we had some new ones made. And
oh, that's beautiful, man. Oh, I can't wait to get that one.
The very first one is going to you. That's a for real thing. So I hope you cherish it. It says Chris Grollnek Founders Coin. I didn't write it. Glenn made this. Glenn Norling. Shout out. Active Shooter Prevention Project 2024 coin. And it's got A-Train Tactical. He is a senior fellow from Customs and Border Protection that's working with us. It has Train Be Ready, which is Glenn Norling's company. Probably my oldest friend and best friend, Greg Schaefer. He's former hostage rescue team too. His company, Schaefer Security Group. It's got Sandra Krager because she's a pivotal part of our company. And the number one thing I want people to remember is never here, right? It's right there, right? The destination is possible and we can get there. We just have to fight together to get there, and we have to make sure we're not fighting each other. And if I have any words of wisdom, right? No stop, no quit, keep going. We can get there together. And Greg, it's been my pleasure and honor, really, truthfully, to interview. And I hope we can come back because I missed a question I wanted to ask you, but we're out of time. And you can have plenty of time to remember it about MMPI. I want to know about why I got to fix flowers or fix engines. I still can't figure out what that means in police. But my brother, God bless you. Thank you so much. I look forward to talking to you in the
Thank you.
near
It's been
future.
an honor being with you. Really enjoyed it. Thanks so much, Chris.
All right. Take care.
All right. Bye-bye.
Everyone, thanks so much for joining me with Dr. Greg Vecchi today. Not only is he an author, but I think you just saw transparently he's a pretty humble person. He knows more about behavioral science than all of us will probably ever forget. I look forward to you joining us on the next show. We have a special guest lined up for you. And I just want you to remember, never here is possible, but it's going to take us all. I'm Chris Grollnek, produced by Ruben Roll.